All right. So I'm really sorry about this. I know there's only one person here. Um, I'll do my best with this. I don't know what just happened, but it oh boy, like it for whatever reason OBS wasn't sending to the stream, and it just wasn't working out. So the good news is that it's working now, and we can get something going here, which is a good thing. Um, Welcome back. It's it's been a week, to say the least. I hope y'all had a really good spring break. Um, I got caught up on a lot of stuff myself. Not as much as I would have liked, but at the very least, it gave me some time to get things going. So, um, if I'm a little spacey today, I apologize. Probably TMI, but the doctor put me on like this steroid to help with my feet that hurt like hell. And it makes my brain a little bit fuzzy. So if I'm kind of losing track of where we're at, or it's taking me a while to finish a thought, one of the side effects is that it doesn't allow you to think clearly. So if you ever get put on prednisone, man, like, just watch out for that shit. So in any case, let's get to it. We're already 5 minutes deep because of the tech delay. So yeah, we'll just get rolling. So the first thing that we should talk about is, let's talk about a couple things that have happened in the class in terms of like announcements and some other things that I think are important just to capture for us really quick. Go to desktop capture. Let me sign into Blackboard really quick. And let's go to one of the 1301 courses. So I've posted a few announcements in the past couple of days. Kind of welcome back, and there was a really clickbaity title one. But if you haven't read these announcements, please read them. I know it's really tempting to just click them off and not pay attention, but this is how I communicate with you. Whether, especially if there's something I'm trying to broadcast to the entire class. Like, this is something that I need you to look at. So the most important one for you right now to really look over is the welcome back. If you've noticed a few zeros on your grade, there's a reason for that, and I explain it here. If you're concerned, please reach out. There's no secrets here. I want to be as transparent as possible, so have a look over that. Also, please remember that our discussion assignment has changed. You no longer have to pose your own question and reply to two of your peers. You're just responding to my prompt. And as a result, there is a new rubric, so please look at that rubric. It's really important for you to look at that rubric so that you can understand exactly what I am asking of you in that assignment. And if you're thinking, I don't know how to look at a rubric in this new Blackboard, I believe I have a video for that. And I think it's in here. So you can check that out. And if that doesn't work, let me know, and I'll record another video for you just to make it clear. But every assignment, with the exception of the reflections and like the quizzes and whatnot, but the essay assignments and or the major essay assignments and the discussion have a rubric attached. So if we look, let's just look at page 9 or week 9. So if we go to the discussion, what you should see here is, over on the right, you should see a new rubric, new discussion rubric, and then it lays out the criteria. So have a look at that. Make sure that you are seeing that fairly clearly. And again, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to answer them for you. Other stuff in those announcements, just to make sure that if you're here, you're seeing them, or if you're watching this video on replay, you're seeing them. Let's take a look back. I am really foggy. I'm sorry. So yeah, the rest of the stuff is pretty, we're resuming our schedule, blah blah. I did want to make you aware of the extra credit opportunity that you have. It's this Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I'm giving a lecture on Christopher Columbus and the quote-unquote discovery of the New World. It should be pretty interesting. I think it's really super interesting. And if you attend the lecture, and there's the link for Zoom, and you write me a little one-page reflection about what you saw and what you thought about it, then I will add 10 points to your primary source argument number 1 essay grade, which is a big deal. That segment of your grade, combined with the second one, which we'll talk more about next week, is worth 40%. So adding 10% to one of those assignments is actually a significant boost. It could make a big difference. Not like it can't take you from like a D to an A. Like, let's be clear, but it can, if you're on a border grade, like if you've got an 88, that could push you to an. So something to consider. And if you want to see the cool flyer that I made, there it is. It's so exciting. I'm so excited to give this talk. I still gotta, finish the presentation, but I'll get there eventually. So, in any case, those are the big announcements that I have for you. There's, there's not much else to really catch you up on. In terms of our content, let's switch gears. Let's go to Google Maps real quick. I'm very fond of that. Oh, look, a place we're not going to talk about today, because the United States isn't exactly there yet. We're going to focus over here. And I want to have this map up just so that we can understand what exactly is going on. Because we have to set up the economic system that is going to shape the United States for the rest of the course. And it's important that we understand this, because this market system that we're going to talk about today really helps connect the dots in terms of why the North and South start to grow apart as much as they're growing together, how some pieces on the board get moved around, and it's helping us tie a bunch of things together that we have in the past looked at separately. And that's one of the things that we want to do is make sure we understand how cohesive the United States is before we blow it apart in the antebellum period, which is the period that we're about to enter, and we get to the Civil War. So basically, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, from this point until we talk about the Civil War, everything that we discuss has implications for how the Civil War is going to come about. Even this market revolution that we're talking about 60, 70 years before the Civil War actually takes place. It's that critical. So, just to recap where we were before we had our spring break, we saw the birth of the United States. We saw a fight over the type of government that the United States should use in terms of forming the nation. And ultimately what we kind of saw was a different definition of freedom and liberty. And I was trying to get you to think about this a little bit before the break. And in the North, in particular, in New England, and states that don't have a big agricultural center, there was a lot of impetus, a lot of desire to kind of bring these disparate states together. Remember, in the fight between Federalists and Anti-Federalists, one of the big dividing lines was, should we have a strong central government or should we let the states govern themselves? Well, ultimately, what you notice about the states that tend to support the Anti-Federalist position is they tend to be more agricultural. They can kind of sustain themselves. Whereas states like Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, the New England states don't have as much farming capability because they don't have the soil for it, and as a result, they aren't producers in the same way that those southern states are. Now, let's be really clear about something. This is before the market revolution. This is about to change in a big, big way. So, ultimately, the Federalists went out, and we have a bit of some growing pains in the 1780s and the 1790s, to say the least, and even into the early 1800s, and with the War of 1812, etc. Now, at the same time that things like War of 1812 and a few other things that are happening at the beginning of the 19th century are going on, some big things happen. And one of the things that you're probably hip to as a person who lives on the planet Earth in the 21st century is that technology can really change the game in terms of how we live our lives. Now, if you're old like me, then you know that there was a life before the internet. And man, life pre-internet was different. It was completely different. The internet changed a lot of things, to say the very least. How we consume so many different things changed because of the internet. It's amazing to me. But when I was like 10, man, we had none of that. And I wasn't really on the internet, so to speak, until maybe 2000, 2001. Even then, I'd say 2003 would be like the first year that the internet was a part of my daily life. But anyway, what we're going to see is right now that technology really changes how the system of the market that governs the United States works. So, 3 big inventions that I want to put on the map, for you really quick. Number 1, the cotton gin. Number 2, the telegraph. And number 3, the steamboat. And there's actually a 4th one, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I want to save that as a surprise, build a little suspense here. So let's talk about the cotton gin. And you may have never seen what a cotton gin looks like. So let's look at one. So this is, based on our quick Google search and wiki, which, whatever, that's fine. Let's take a look at this. This is a cotton gin. And it may look pretty simple. And okay, it is a fairly simple machine at first glance. But what this machine does in terms of changing the United States is immense. Now, what does a cotton gin do? Well, first of all, you probably know who invented it. It was this guy named Eli Whitney. He invents it in 1793. It was, I guarantee you, on your STAR exam back in 8th grade, if you took history here in Texas, or you went to high school in Texas. That's not the important bit. But what the cotton gin does is it speeds up the process of cleaning cotton. So you can see down here, we've got some cotton. And if you go out let's say you go out to like Fabens or San Eli or Clint, and there's still cotton fields out there. And you go and you walk through the fields and you pick some cotton. You're not going to get that nice, clean, white cotton that you're used to getting in like a cotton ball, which, duh, of course. Well, it takes a lot of effort to clean cotton by hand. You've got to pick out all the stems and the seeds. You've got to separate it out, and it takes a long time. So, to put it in perspective, prior to the invention of the cotton gin, it would take a laborer, a slave, 1 day to clean 1 pound of cotton. And as a result, cotton's not very profitable, because if you're only able to have one slave in 1 day pick 1 pound of cotton, you're not producing a whole lot. And you can't get it out to market in a quantity that justifies selling it regularly, because you just don't have enough. Especially, like, let's say you're in Virginia or you're in North Carolina, especially North Carolina, and you have tobacco at your disposal. Like, you're going to grow more tobacco. If you're in South Carolina, you're going to get more money from rice or indigo. So you're not going to focus on cotton because it's so time intensive and therefore expensive to produce. Enter the cotton gin. The cotton gin takes that one slave with that 1 day and allows that one slave in 1 day to clean 50 pounds of cotton. So think about that. This invention, shown on the screen in front of us, allows a 50 times increase in the amount of product available. Now, to be really clear, cotton was in demand, but there wasn't enough supply of it to really, kind of meet that demand. But now with the cotton gin that separates the seeds, cleans it out, cotton becomes a much more viable product. And because the cotton gin makes it such a more viable product, people start being able to use it a whole lot more to get that profit that they couldn't before. It's all of a sudden now. Let's bring this map up. Let me. It can. It's actually one of those things that. Sorry, my brain is just not capable of connecting the 3 thoughts that I'm having in my brain right now. Oh man, that's a small image. Let's take a look at this map right here. All right, so all of a sudden, places like North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, etc., that were growing rice and were growing tobacco and other such things, now have another option, because the cotton gin makes it a viable product. And look how much more land there is for cotton. Now, there's another part of this story. And we've mostly, if we look at our map, we've been talking about the East Coast, this Eastern Seaboard corridor right here. With a little bit of Pennsylvania thrown in, all of Pennsylvania, all of New York. But this is mostly, we're kind of penned in by Appalachia. And one of the reasons why is because Appalachia is the boundary between us and the French that own this territory out here. Now you might be thinking, well, what does the French have to do with this? And let me remind you of the Louisiana Purchase. So let's take a look at a Louisiana Purchase map really quick. Use the wiki map, that's fine. But take a look at this map. So here, this is our traditional boundary. We had started to push out into the Ohio River Valley a little bit, but look at all of this territory out here. And think about, even now, how much territory, or how much farming happens on this territory now. I mean, like, if you've ever done a cross-country drive, especially like through I-70, which runs here, or I-80 that runs a little bit further north, like, there's nothing but farmland out here, unless you get to a major city like Omaha or Des Moines or St. Louis. I mean, it's just a lot of farmland. And this helps change the game, especially in the South. There's a couple different reasons why. So number one, we already have this kind of farming, this cotton band that's forming down here, okay, in the states that we already own or already have control over, okay, all the way up to Louisiana. But there's more to be had over here. We're not really going to get Texas for a little bit. I mean, we'll tell that story a little later on. The acquisition of Texas is a big deal in terms of heading towards the Civil War, but more on that in a few weeks. So we have this new territory, and most importantly, there's a river that runs right here. We go to the map, zoom in, here's St. Louis. There's this river. And you should know what that river is. This is the Mississippi River. And what the Mississippi River does is, besides, be a river, is it terminates down here in New Orleans. So if you look at where the Mississippi River ends, oh my God, come on, mouse. Mississippi River ends down here. What's important about New Orleans? Besides Mardi Gras, we're almost through Lent, guys, by the way. In any case, I'm really, my brain is not all there. In any case, New Orleans gives you access to the Gulf of Mexico, and it was an important trading city. In fact, other than New York and maybe Charleston, maybe, New Orleans might be the most important port city in the United States at this time. Well, it's not quite a part of the United States yet, but at least in North America. The French were here. It gives you access to the Caribbean, and if you remember from world history, there's a lot of stuff happening out here in the Caribbean. So not only are the French out here, but the Dutch are out here, the English are out here, the Spanish are still around-ish, though not that much. The Portuguese are still around-ish, but not that much. They've kind of pulled back. And even if the Spanish and the Portuguese aren't there, they're still the local populations. So, what the Louisiana Purchase does is it gives the United States more land to farm that cotton on, and it gives them the port of New Orleans from which to ship a lot of that cotton from the Deep South, because remember, a lot of that cotton production is happening down here, and it's a whole lot quicker to get it to New Orleans than it is to get it up here to New York City. Okay, because we don't even have railroads yet. So all we have, are simple carts, and then when we get to the water, we have barges that we can float down. Though at this point, they only go one way. Okay, you can only float down the river. So we have more land, we have new ways of transporting goods, or more efficient ways to transport goods. We have a crop that is producing more profit. We've got a big change here. All because of these two seemingly kind of small things. The cotton gin, literally small, and the Louisiana Purchase. Now, one thing before we move on, and I would be very upset with myself if we didn't talk about this, is you may wonder, why was France willing to sell all of this land? Because it's a ton of land. And we got it for a bargain basement deal, to say the least. You can read about those details in the textbook. But this land was cheap. Well, as you probably remember, we bought this land from the French. Okay, the French had claimed land to this, even though people who were living there, etc. But, you know, Europeans gonna European. France claimed dominion over this land. And so the United States is looking at this and going, it'd be great if we could have it. Really, at the time, President Jefferson just really wanted New Orleans because of all of those reasons that we talked about. He kind of saw the writing on the wall, like having New Orleans was going to be an important thing because he wanted to control the river. And so he was a little bit taken back when he sends his emissaries over to France, and Napoleon, the Emperor of France, offers to sell him the whole thing. Now, why is Napoleon willing to do that? That is a story that has to do with this small country, Haiti. Back at this time, before the Louisiana Purchase, Haiti was a French colony known as Saint-Domingue. And Saint-Domingue was, to put it mildly, hell. It was an island on which the French used an incredible amount of slavery to produce an incredible amount of sugar. And the system was so oppressive that eventually, in part inspired by the American Revolution and then the French Revolution especially, the slaves of Haiti rose up in revolt and overthrew the French. They won. They kicked the French out of Saint-Domingue, and they took it over for themselves, renamed it the Republic of Haiti. Now, what does that have to do with Louisiana? Well, Louisiana, or the Louisiana Territory, over here, you can't grow sugar here. But what do we know that grows here? Well, lots of wheat and corn, good, high-calorie food. A lot of food. And if we look back at our map here, if you are trying to grow sugar, one of the most important and lucrative crops, especially of the 18th century and early 19th century, you want to use as much of this land as you possibly can to grow as much sugar as you possibly can. So all of this land is being used, all the farming land here in Haiti is being used for sugar production, by and large. And the French were using the Louisiana Territory to grow the food that they were shipping then down the Mississippi River out into the Gulf of Mexico to feed the slave population that was living in Haiti. Okay? So all of a sudden, after the Haitian Revolution happens and the French are kicked out, they're no longer growing sugar because the Haitians are growing the sugar. They don't need this anymore. And Napoleon is Napoleon. So here he is over in France, and he's going, I want to conquer the world. And he wants to go and fight Russia. And Just a quick tip from history. If you ever want to invade Russia, don't ever do it in the winter, like Napoleon and that asshole from Germany did. You know who I'm talking about. Fuck that guy. Anyway, he wants to finance his wars over here in Europe. So he has no need whatsoever for the Louisiana territory. So when Jefferson sends those emissaries asking for New Orleans, he's more than happy to offload this land. And we buy it. Great. Well, now we have all of this territory. I mean, think about how big the United States just became. This purchase doubles the size of the United States overnight. We don't even have like a whole lot of people out here. Most everything kind of stops right along the Mississippi River. So, and this is a huge deal. So now we have a bigger United States, a United States that is growing a huge amount of cotton down here in the lower South. And they are shipping that cotton out of New Orleans and distributing it up and down the eastern seaboard, out to Europe, etc. All of a sudden, the United States has become a major manufacturing player, at least in terms of cotton. Another thing that changes the game is the steamboat. And you might be thinking, a boat? A steamboat? Really? Well, remember what I said about the Mississippi River. Is that it's a great way to ship things down to New Orleans, but you can only go one direction because you're floating on a barge. So if you've got some stuff up here in Chicago, let's say, and you come over here to the Mississippi and you want to ship it down to New Orleans, well, it's got to float all the way down here, and then the boat can't even go back up. So they would have to recycle the boat, trash the boat, whatever. Now with the steamboat, this meant that you could go in both directions, because now you can go against the current. So now there's two-way traffic on the Mississippi. That opens up some things in terms of exchange. So if you've got some things that are being grown out here in this lush part of the country, no longer do they have to come down to New Orleans and then come out this way or go by land. Now you can just put them back on the Mississippi, and you can get stuff from Memphis up to St. Louis, and from St. Louis to Memphis, whatever. So that's a big deal. And then add on to that, oh, sorry, Siri wanted to chime in. Add on to that, the telegraph. The telegraph allows communications almost instantly by comparison to what there was before in all of this space. So rather than having to send a letter or a messenger or whatever, now somebody in New York, say, could communicate with somebody in New Orleans via this telegraph. It's like the jump for us between pre-internet and having the internet, which is part of why I brought it up earlier. That's how big a deal it is. So now, all of a sudden, even though the United States has grown tremendously over the past few years, between 1790 and, let's say, 1820, Americans have figured out how to make it a bit smaller. So one of my favorite quotes from the time period, I forget who it comes from, but the guy, he's from England, he comes over here and he says, Americans have learned how to annihilate time and space. And that sounds like, Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet doing a little snap, having a blip, time and space is annihilated. Or if you watch the Snyder Cut overbreak in Darkseid, doing what Darkseid does, those things. But think about what he really means there. What he means is that despite that giant size of the United States, Americans have figured out how to shrink it down so that people in Louisiana can communicate with people in New York, and the system's starting to come together. Slowly but surely. Now, I told you about one more invention, or I hinted to it. And for this, let's zoom in on New York. And let's talk about canals. And you might be thinking, really? Canals, bro? Like, no, not canal. But yes, canals. Let's talk about this. Zoom out for a minute. I told you before that New York is the premier place for trade in the United States, just like it is now. Where the stock market exchanges, it's where a lot of the center of business happens. It's great stuff. Now, where is most of our grain? Like the breadbasket of the United States? It's out here, Midwest. Wheat, corn, more wheat, more corn, all of the corn in Iowa. Now, how does all of that corn and wheat get to New York? Well, a couple options. You can take it by land through here, which is dangerous and time consuming. Okay, again, no railroads just yet. It would have to go by cart, and we're talking about huge piles of grain. It would take a long time. Remember, there's not a whole lot of farming land available out here. Or it could go down the Mississippi to New Orleans, out into the Gulf of Mexico, and then come up the coast. Well, that sure seems like a long time. Well, there's a shortcut. And think about what a canal is. A canal is a man-made waterway that connects two bodies of water. So, what if we cut a canal that ran from the Great Lakes through New York State down to another body of water that allowed us to get to New York? Well, that's exactly what we did. So let's start in New York. If we zoom in here, and yeah, this is modern New York, bear with me. You've heard of this river before, the Hudson River. If you watch Law and Order, this is where all the bodies turn up. Okay? Always in the Hudson. Well, if you follow the Hudson up to Albany, you'll notice that there's a waterway that cuts through here. And some of it's man-made, some of it's not. But this whole thing, in total, that cuts across these different cities. Sorry, I'm trying to zoom in on one series. It's called the Erie Canal. And what the Erie Canal does is it does exactly what people wanted it to do. It connects Lake Erie, therefore the Great Lakes region, with the Hudson River, and therefore to New York City. So now, again, with the advent of the steamboat, there is a way to get the grain and wheat from out here to New York to help feed all of the people out here, number one, and number two, to transport out to the rest of the world. And not only is it going to be wheat, and not only is it going to be corn, but eventually places like Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Detroit, etc., they're going to be big meat producers. And that meat, beef, pork, chicken, etc., that's going to be distributed that way as well. And also down to New Orleans to help feed these people and to access these markets. So all of a sudden, America seems pretty connected together, all through the use of this brand new technology, which is, it's exciting. I mean, if you want to see the United States really coming together, like, this is how it happens. There's, of course, a few other sides of the story. Now, we know, for example, that up here and along the East Coast, especially in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, these states especially relied on a lot of slave labor to grow farm tobacco and rice, especially out here. If you also remember from a few weeks ago, you'll remember that tobacco is a crop that exhausts the soil. And so tobacco had exhausted itself pretty much in these areas, and now there's a lot of surplus slavery going on here. Meanwhile, the demand for rice, indigo, it mostly stays the same. It drops a little bit. The demand for tobacco, there's demand, but there's not a whole lot of supply. So now we have farmers who have to kind of adjust. They don't need as many slaves. And so they start selling them off. And it just so happens that there's a whole lot of big landowners that live in the southern part of the United States who are going to start growing cotton and who are going to start needing slaves. In their mind, they don't need slaves. They could have paid them. Of course they could have. But they didn't want to. They felt that these people deserved to be slaves. That's how it works. It's a monstrous, abominable practice. But regardless, these folks need to offload those slaves, and we've got a market here. So all of a sudden, we have a shift. Slavery moves further west and further south, and it's concentrated right in here. And even from the north, okay, lots and lots of slaves are moved out and down here. So we get a major concentration of slavery in the South. Up here, slavery is becoming illegal more and more and more. We didn't have a chance to talk about this, but you read about it in your textbook. After the Revolution, especially in New England, in Pennsylvania, etc., there were more and more emancipation legislations passed. Okay, so the new state constitutions of Massachusetts end up prohibiting slavery, those sorts of things. So all of those slaves that existed out here and then up here are all of a sudden concentrated down here. And we have a agricultural system in the South that is completely reliant on slavery. That's a major step towards civil war. Because these folks, they don't have slaves. Okay, if they do, they're very few and far between. And the economy doesn't depend on slavery. Down here, it absolutely does. Out here is kind of a murky, there's slavery that exists out here, but there's some other things going on. There's lots of immigrant labor out here. If you go to Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, there's lots of Western European immigrants, lots of Germans and Swedes. You don't get Southern and Eastern Europeans coming over in droves until after the Civil War, and they mostly concentrate out here. There are a lot of Scandinavian, Bavarian, i.e. German folk who live out here, and even now. Yeah. In any case, we didn't really get a chance to talk about what's going on up here in the north. And so let me be brief, because we only have a few minutes left. We talked about the South becoming more agricultural and dependent on cotton, and therefore dependent on slavery. Here we see, in the Midwest, we see a bit more diversity in terms of product. So wheat, corn, meat, more food, breadbasket-y stuff. So a lot of the food's being grown here, and we have a lot of raw materials being produced down here. So up here is the place where those raw materials are converted into goods. And what we see happen in the North, as opposed to the South, is massive industrialization. Okay, we're not talking quite, Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford industrialization. That happens at the end of the century. But here, at the beginning of the 19th century, right in that 1800 to 1820, 1830 period, we see the rise of elementary factories. Okay, not the full-blown assembly lines of Henry Ford, but we have major sites where people are taking the cotton that is produced in the South, they're being fed by the people in the Midwest, and they are taking that cotton and other raw materials and they're converting them into goods, like textiles especially, okay? Blankets, sheets, clothing, all that sort of stuff. And that is how the North makes its money. That's how it contributes to the economy. So we have this system that develops, right? So we have the food, the raw materials down here, and the place where it all comes together up here in the Northeast. This is part of the reason why the United States is able to enter the international market so successfully early on, for us anyway, because we have this kind of system working for itself. And major ports and markets, it's a big deal. Now, one of the things that we're going to have to keep track of over the next several weeks is how people here responded to those major changes. Because let's be honest, what's happening down here in the South and what's happening out here in the Midwest is more analogous. It is a lot similar to, I should say, the kind of life that people were living prior to the Industrial Revolution. It's kind of seen as more simple and, like rural and, kind of that old-fashioned stuff. Here, the future has arrived. And when there's new technology and industrialization and all of this other stuff, urbanization too, that creates an incredible amount of anxiety. And people respond to that anxiety in different ways. Some people think that, at least back here in the early 1800s, that these cities are just cesspools of crime and alcohol addiction and places where people lose their religion. Sound familiar? Some people think that there are too many immigrants that are here and we need to get rid of them. Does that sound familiar? It's not people of color at this point. Okay, they focus their attention on the Irish. We'll talk a little bit about that. There becomes a big divide between the native born and the Irish. Again, we'll talk about it. Some people think that these new machines are the devil themselves, and they want to retreat away from them. They go live by a lake for a few years and write a book about it that you may have had to read at some point. Here's looking at you, Henry David Thoreau. Some people think that men have lost their ability to be men. Okay? The factory, the urban environment feminizes men. And so men have to recapture their masculinity somehow. So some of them try this new sport called baseball. That's part of how baseball gets its start. So that's something that we're going to keep track of over the next several weeks as we see how Americans navigate these new environments. And it's really kind of interesting to see how much what happened then is a lot like what's happening now. It's a lot of different permutations. There's differences, etc. But there's also quite a bit that rings true and is the same. So something for you to think about. All right, the couple of you who are here, I'm going to go ahead and pause. And if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. I'm happy to take them. Well, cool. It looks like you guys don't have questions, but I appreciate you being here. Sorry I'm a little bit frazzled. Hopefully next week I'll be kind of more centered and able to connect things together a little bit better. But let me know if you have any questions about the assignments this week. If you've got any questions about grades or whatever, don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to answer them for you. I'm close to my computer just about any time, so if you send me an email, I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. But just keep on keeping on. I'm glad you all are back. I'm looking forward to next week when we will talk about the democratization of America. We'll talk a little bit about Andrew Jackson, who's a dick, and what his presence and arrival and presence, I should say, on the political scene does for the United States. So stay tuned, and I will see you all next week in the next video. Take care, guys.